Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul, Loli.
I want pure colors, melting clouds, accurately drawn details, a sunburst above a receding road with the light reflected in furrows and ruts after rain. And no girls.
The truth is, Lolita is a controversial novel. When it was finally published in America in August of 1958, it planted a seed of discourse that would last generations.
I think I've always been attracted to characters that have enigma, that have many levels, that make the audience question whether they are good or bad.
Okay, so your suggestion is that what's so disturbing about this is that we actually like this guy. We actually come to like Humbert.
So when you reading this and start questioning what's normal, then Humbert done got you by the balls, sucker.
Lolita is a book written by Russian-American novelist Vladimir Nabokov. It is most notable for the number of controversial topics it touches upon.
I think that Lolita is very similar to myself.
I'm not so much interested in the philosophy of the book as I am in weaving the thing in a certain way.
Can you say that Humbert only helps sexually attracted
It's great literature, and it's great parts. All four of them are really wonderful, extraordinary individual roles. It's very hard to pass up a part like Claire Quilty.
I wanted to make a movie of Nabokov's novel because it's, I think, one of the great novels of this century. It makes you laugh, it makes you cry, it makes you horrified, and
Call me that.
That's right. Murder me like you murdered my mother.
Stop it.
Murder me, pervert!
70 years later, one novel continues to defy readers, inspire artists, and confuse audiences. But is it misunderstood genius or just dangerous fiction? Lolita. Vladimir Nabokov's magnum opus is one of those rare novels that, despite not being regularly taught in American high schools, is an American classic that is still discussed today. The controversy and dialogue surrounding this novel and its movie counterparts have not ended, which is a testament to just how much depth Nabokov was able to put into this story that we're still talking about it 70 years after its initial publication. So today, I'm going to be asking the question, 70 years of Lolita, problematic or pragmatic? But before we begin, I want to give both a spoiler warning because I will be spoiling major parts of the story, so if you haven't read the book or watched the movies and you would like to without any spoilers, this is your warning. And also a content warning. This story involves hepaphilia, grooming, and abuse, and will be discussed in this video. So if this is something you'd rather not hear about, this may not be the video for you. But I have many other videos that aren't as heavy, so check those out if you'd like. This will be a longer video that covers some of the background of Nabokov and how this novel came to be, so if you're wanting to skip around, use the chapters feature in the description. And finally, videos like this take a lot of time, effort, and research, so if you'd like this content, please subscribe, share, and like this video, as it really helps support the channel so I can continue making more. Thank you. Now, back to the video. Today we see Nabokov's novels being taught at the collegiate level from your local state colleges all the way up to the Ivy Leagues. But before he shocked the world with Lolita in 1955, Vladimir Nabokov was better known in academia teaching Russian and European literature at Cornell, teaching 3 courses on the subject, 2 of which in Russian would make what he did with his command of the English language in Lolita all the more impressive as English was his second language. But for Nabokov, language wasn't just a tool, it was a game, a puzzle, a moral instrument. But let's back up for a minute, because Lolita wasn't Nabokov's first attempt at writing a story like this. Years earlier, in 1939, he had quietly written a novella in Russian titled The Enchanter. The Enchanter wouldn't be published until after his death in 1986, but would prove to be a kind of rough sketch of the same themes he would later revisit in Lolita. That of a predatory man, a young girl, and the attempt to cloak horror in aesthetic beauty. And as someone who has read The Enchanter, it is definitely rougher around the edges and less refined, but you can clearly see how this is a building block to Lolita, which brings us to 1953. At this point, Nabokov had completed the manuscript for Lolita, but perhaps so horrified and disturbed by the implications of his own creation, he nearly burned it in a fire. If it weren't for Vera, his wife, who after stepping out to find her husband had lit a fire, beginning to feed his papers to it, yelled out to him, "Get away from there," retrieving the pages, announcing, "We are keeping this," as well as many other times her husband tried to burn his manuscript, we very may well have never have gotten this novel at all. So shout out to Vera as truly the unsung hero of this story. She's an interesting woman all to her own right, and even has a Pulitzer Prize winning biography written about her if you'd like to learn more. But continuing on, after saving the manuscript, the next hurdle would be getting published. Nabokov would submit the manuscript to multiple publishers in the US, but all rejected it on moral grounds. See, American literature culture in the 1950s was still tightly bound by censorship and the lingering effects of the Comstock laws. These are a set of federal laws passed in 1873 that restrict the mailing of obscene, lewd, and
lascivious
materials. And fun fact, these laws from 1873 are still on the books and are being used to restrict access to abortion medication via the mail today. The more you know. Anyways, this meant no publisher wanted to touch a novel about a middle-aged man's obsession with a 12-year-old girl, which led him to look for publishers outside of the US. Eventually, it would be picked up by Olympian Press, an independent publisher in Paris known for erotica. And while it ensured Lolita saw the light of day in 1955, it associated it with smut, complicating the novel's reputation. Critics weren't sure what to make of it. Was it art or pornography? In the following years, Lolita was banned in France, the United Kingdom, Argentina, and many other countries. But controversy has always been good for sales. In the United States, the novel ignited public outrage and captivated literary elites. It became a bestseller and has since sold over 50 million copies worldwide. And with so much attention and the financial freedom won by his newfound success, Nabokov would retire from Cornell in September of 1959. And it wouldn't be long until Hollywood would be knocking at his door. Yeah, how did they ever make a movie of Lolita? That's actually a really good question. Well, in 1962, Stanley Kubrick adapted Lolita for the screen with a screenplay written by Nabokov himself, although much of his original script was ultimately discarded. Kubrick's version toned down the sexual elements to appease censors and leaned into the dark humor, leaving viewers to wonder whether the film was exposing the horror or making it more palatable. This of course further complicated the perception of Lolita. At this point, Lolita was firmly in the cultural zeitgeist with a best-selling novel and a major motion picture adapted by one of the most prolific American filmmakers of all time. Yet this is where the troubling pop culture legacy that is propagated throughout music, fashion, film, and beyond truly began, because the uninhibited tomboyish girl described in Nabokov's novel feels worlds apart from this adaptation. Yes, the censor played a large part in the many changes, and just like the novel, telling a story from the perspective of the perpetrator can be inherently troublesome. But this just wasn't Lolita. And that's because the film lacked the carefully constructed context in Nabokov's satirical novel. It leaves in the sexual objectification of the title character, but leaves out Humbert's perversive proclivities. According to James Harris, the film's producer, on the subject he said, "We knew we must make her a sex object, where everyone in the audience could understand why everyone would want to jump on her. We made sure when we casted her that she was a definite sex object, not something that could be interpreted as being perverted. We wanted it to come off as a love story and to feel very sympathetic with Humbert." End quote. Though 14 during filming, wrote critic Daniel Devers in 1974, Line appears to be a well-developed 17, and Humbert's desire for her comes off as ordinary lust. Now you might be thinking, this is an odd thing to say, especially coming from a person who produced a film about a middle-aged man preying on a teenage girl. But it actually makes perfect sense when you find out that Harris actually slept with an underage Sue Lyon, tragically perpetuating the real-life abuse at the heart of Nabokov's novel and further complicating Lolita's legacy even more. But hey, at least Nabokov himself would express his dissatisfaction with the film and wouldn't do anything himself to complicate the perception of Lolita. Oh, other than doing an interview with Playboy magazine in 1964 and ranking number 22 in the Playboy's 55 most important people in sex list. Yeah. Needless to say, with so much scandal, government censors, and Nabokov being intentionally provocative by taking an interview with Playboy, it's easy to see how the public at large could see Lolita as some forbidden romance, even if that couldn't be further from the truth. But it would be 36 years later until we get one final adaptation. The year is 1998. America still has its strong attraction to teenage girls, and Adrian Lane's Lolita is set to release in the United States. A version that is much closer to the original vision of the classic novel. And admittedly, I do like this version. There's a lot of things that it gets right. The government censors were no longer an issue, the acting and chemistry between Jeremy Irons and Dominic Swain is fantastic, and it's just aesthetically pleasing. But that's not to say that it doesn't have its issues. With the government censors now gone, Lane was able to portray the story more accurately than it had ever been before. But the problem is that some might be emboldened by Humbert's actions. Not that this is unique to this film, as clearly Kubrick's version already had that issue, but this version shows a lot more than Kubrick ever did. Although I do think it's in a way that doesn't glamorize any abuse. Though some have said that showing the story from Humbert's perspective on screen is the problem because Humbert is an unreliable narrator. Something that is incredibly hard to get across on film when the camera often feels like an objective perspective. Which is true because Humbert is an unreliable narrator. If not for any other reason, then we all are. Any story told from a first-person perspective will have an unreliable narrator because no one is objective. But I think people take this a bit too far, discrediting everything that Humbert says because they're rightfully disgusted by his actions. The reason I feel differently on this is something that neither film really does, and that's the foreword. In the foreword of the book, we learn from fictional psychologist John Ray Jr. that he's given this manuscript written by Humbert while he's in legal captivity, awaiting his trial for the murder of one Claire Quilty. Humbert's trial has inherently nothing to do with Dolores, Lolita's real name, and is in fact stated by John Ray Jr. that everything with Dolores would have remained a complete mystery had Humbert not willingly written the manuscript. So it just doesn't make sense to me that Humbert, while on trial for murder, confesses to years worth of crimes he has never even suspected of, just to downplay the events and lie about loving Dolores to make himself look better. If he wanted to hold up appearances, he simply wouldn't confess to any of it at all. And that's why I tend to buy Humbert's narrative perhaps more than most. Not because he wooed me with his beautiful prose style, but because it just doesn't make any sense for him to lie at that point. Now, that being said, Humbert is not a good person. His actions are wrong, and even if I believe that he does love Dolores at the end, this still isn't a romance. It's a tragedy. A tragedy that even Lane's version can't quite capture because they once again make Lolita a slightly older 14 compared to her novel counterpart's 12. Why this even matters is despite 14 actually being almost too old for Humbert's proclivities, is that Dolores dies at 17 during childbirth. It really hits hard how her childhood was stolen because she never even reached adulthood. And that weighed on me for quite a while the first time I read this book because I felt so incredibly bad for Dolores. The pain that Humbert puts her through, just for her to die the moment it seems like her life is getting on track, was heartbreaking. And to technically know that from the beginning, as it's all there in the foreword, is what made me fall in love with this story. It's a stroke of genius that unfortunately over time has been more than misconstrued, and one that's even hard to talk about given the controversy. So, does that make Lolita a problematic story? It's probably pretty obvious that I like this novel a lot. I'm not coming from an unbiased place because I think it's a brilliant work of art, and I would like to believe that Lolita isn't inherently problematic. This story has been co-opted by nefarious people for 70 years now, but I think this is still an important story. Unfortunately, people like Humbert exist, and dehumanizing them as some otherworldly monster isn't an effective plan to reduce harm. Seeing them as people who have an attraction that they can't change, because I don't think anyone can just change their sexual attraction, but shouldn't act upon it, and making sure that they don't is something I think is valuable. And on the flip side, I think even some women that have been sexualized from a young age have found Lolita to be a story worth being told, and something that they can connect with. I think of Lana Del Rey, Melanie Martinez, and even Billie Eilish to some extent. Some of their art seems to, if not directly inspired by Lolita, indirectly inspired by those kinds of relationships. So I don't think Lolita is dangerous fiction. Instead, a work of art with a troubled past, but something that's more than the sum of its parts. Something with value even if it leaves us conflicted, because it's not the job of literature to shoulder the burden of human morality. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. Like I said, this video took a lot of research, and I really like blending commentary and documentary. So let me know if you like this style too. Also, I want to hear your opinions on Lolita as well. This is such a complex piece of work that I feel I can go on for days. Anyways, thanks for watching. Peace.